Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
It was a wedding parade that was coming down the road between the tall trees that lined the farms and made shadows on the road. At the front were the bride and groom, then the family, then the guests, and last of all the poor people from the village. The village children, who were like little flies, ran up and down the narrow road, going in and out of the group or climbing the trees to see better. The groom was a handsome young man named Jean Patou. He was the richest farmer in the area, but more than anything, he loved hunting. He was a very passionate hunter, and he would spend a lot of money on his dogs, his helpers, his small animals for hunting, and his guns. The bride, Rosalie Roussel, was liked by many young men in the area. They all thought she was pretty, and they knew she would get a lot of money when she married. But she chose Patou. Maybe because she liked him more than the others, but also as a smart girl from Normandy because he had more money. As they went through the white gate of the groom's farm, 40 gunshots rang out, but they did not see who fired them because the people were hiding in the ditches. The loud noise seemed to make the men, who were walking slowly in their best clothes, happy. Patou left his wife, ran to a farm worker he saw behind a tree, took his gun, and fired a shot himself, acting playful like a young horse. Then they walked on under the apple trees full of fruit, through the tall grass, and past the young cows. The cows, with their big eyes, stood up slowly and kept watching the wedding group. The men became quiet and serious as they got closer to the wedding dinner. Some of them, the richer ones, wore tall, shiny hats that looked out of place there. Others had old hats that looked worn out. The poorest men wore caps. All the women wore shawls on their backs, holding the ends under their arms. Their red and colorful shawls were so bright that they surprised the black chickens in the yard, the ducks near the pond, and the pigeons on the roofs. The large farm building seemed to be waiting at the end of the path under the apple trees. A light steam came out from the open doors and windows, and a strong smell of food filled the air. The smell came from everywhere in the big building, from every door, window, and even the walls. The line of guests stretched through the yard, but when the people at the front reached the house, they broke apart and went in, while the people behind were still walking in through the open gate. The ditches were now filled with village children and curious poor people, and the sound of gunfire continued from all sides. A cloud of smoke and the smell mixed in the air, making everyone feel excited. The women were shaking the dust from their dresses outside the door, untying their hats, and pulling their shawls over their arms. Then they went inside to take off their shawls and hats. The table was set in the big kitchen, which could hold 100 people. They started eating dinner at 2 o'clock, and by 8 o'clock, they were still eating. The men, in their shirt sleeves, with their vests unbuttoned and red faces, were eating and drinking like they couldn't stop. The cider sparkled, clear and golden in the big glasses, next to the dark red wine. Between each dish, they drank a small glass of brandy, called the Normandy Hole, which made their bodies feel warm and their heads a little silly. They shared funny jokes across the table until they ran out of ideas. For the last 100 years, the same funny stories were told at these events, and even though everyone knew them, they still made everyone laugh loudly. At one end of the table, four young men, who were neighbors, were planning some tricks for the bride and groom. They whispered and laughed, and suddenly, one of them, taking advantage of a quiet moment, said loudly, "The poachers will have a good night with this bright moon." "Jean, you won't be looking at the moon, will you?" The groom quickly turned to him and replied, "Just let them come, that's all." But the other young man started laughing and said, "I don't think you'll be paying much attention to them tonight." Everyone at the table burst into laughter so hard that the glasses shook, but the groom became very angry at the idea of anyone hunting on his land during his wedding. He repeated, "I'm saying, just let them come." Then the talk became more personal and made the bride blush, even though she was excited about what was coming. When the kegs of brandy were empty, everyone went to bed. The young couple went into their room, which was on the ground floor, like most rooms in farmhouses. It was very warm, so they opened the window and closed the shutters. A small lamp, a gift from the bride's father, was burning on the dresser, and the bed was ready for the couple. The young woman had already taken off her flower crown and her dress. She was now in her petticoat and was unlacing her boots, while Jean was finishing his cigar and watching her from the corner of his eyes. Suddenly, like someone ready to start work, he quickly took off his coat. She had already taken off her boots and was now pulling off her stockings. Then she said to him, "Go and hide behind the curtains while I get into bed." At first, it looked like he didn't want to, but then he did as she asked. In a moment, she unfastened her petticoat, and it slipped down and fell to the ground. She left it there, stepped over it in her loose nightdress, and slid into the bed, which made a little noise as she got in. He went up to the bed right away, bent over his wife, and tried to kiss her, but she hid her face under the pillow. Then, suddenly, a loud shot was heard far away, in the direction of the rape's forest, or at least that's what he thought. He quickly sat up, feeling nervous, and ran to the window to open the shutters. The bright moon filled the yard with a yellow light, and the apple trees made dark shadows on the ground. Far in the distance, the fields shone with the ripe corn ready for harvest. While he was leaning out of the window, listening to every sound in the quiet night, two bare arms wrapped around his neck. His wife whispered softly, trying to pull him back, "Leave them alone. It's not your problem. Come back to bed." He turned around, put his arms around her, and pulled her toward him. Just as he was laying her on the bed, which bent a little under her weight, they heard another gunshot, much closer this time. Jean, full of anger, shouted, "Darn it. They will think I am not going out to check because of you. Wait for a few minutes." He quickly put on his shoes again and took down his gun, which was always hanging nearby on the wall. His wife fell to her knees in fear, begging him not to go. But he quickly freed himself, ran to the window, and jumped into the yard. She waited for 1 hour, then 2 hours, until the sun started to rise, but her husband did not come back. Then she panicked, woke up everyone in the house, and told them how angry Jean was and that he had gone after the poachers. Right away, all the farm workers, even the boys, went to search for their master. They found him far from the farm, tied up hand and foot, very angry, with his gun broken, his pants turned inside out, and with 3 dead rabbits hanging around his neck. There was also a sign on his chest that said, "Who hunts loses their place." In later years, when Gene would tell the story of his wedding night, he would usually add, "Well, as a joke, it was a good one. They caught me in a trap like I was a rabbit, those dirty guys, and they even put my head in a bag. But if I ever catch them one day, they'd better watch out." That's how they have fun in Normandy on a wedding day.